Okay, so having dealt with the siege of Lavalette Castle, let's go...
Vernon Roach, Special Forces Commander for the last 4 years, servant of the Temerian King, responsible for the pacification of the Mahakaman foothills, hunter of elves, murderer of women and children, twice decorated for valor on the field of battle.
Yorveth, a regular son of a whore!
I've long awaited our meeting.
Enough of this piss!
Starley!
Ken spars parapet lawn lort!
Alright, so we have to protect Roach over here in this specific situation. I'm going to switch to the longsword because we're going to need that kind of capability.
You know each other?
Rather well. But he has amnesia. I actually took the Witcher by surprise when I killed Foltest. Fear not, Elf. I know Geralt. I know his weakness.
Yeah, so she's spent, and we got to meet every single major character in, well, the storyline. So we got Yorveth, we got Roach, we got Lefo, and now we're going to meet some other important people over here in the game. So here we are with the hanging Dandelion.
Zoltan. Dandelion, my informer.
Just great.
You relied on Dandelion to be your informer? Yeah, Roach is a really competent fellow right here, but relying on Dandelion to be a spy is something else. Yeah, this is where we turn the crowd against him and maybe get every single person over here on our side. Is the non-violent solution. And there he goes. Of course, we still have the Executioner to deal with, but he's gonna be less of a problem to tackle. Well, there goes one elf. I suppose they did have their spectacle at the end of the day. Loredo is an interesting character study because he's clearly a frontline commander of Foltest and he's dealing with a lot of tension. He's not necessarily against non-humans. He's just trying to keep the peace in a very broken and bad and corrupt way, of course, because ultimately that's the name of the game when you're dealing with frontline provinces. But he absolutely is a compelling character from the perspective of understanding how things work on the front line as opposed to how things are supposed to work in the fantasy scenario that a lot of people do craft in their heads. Well, Zoltan also himself has a specific point on that subject that is not something to be denied. And we get a bunch of contracts and different things to deal with. At this point in the game, once you've done all of that, you do have all kinds of different decisions to be made on the subject in Flotsam. And I think, like, really, Flotsam is the true beginning of the game because it does expose various elements of how the very front line in the provinces that it is actually ends up working. One of the things to point out, however, before we go on, is one of the fault lines that actually did exist over here. See, you need a silver sword. That requires silver ore and all kinds of materials right here. It's not really a problem, so to speak, because you can trade with the dwarf, but you need the silver in order to make it. So we just need to buy it. We need to have the money. It's not too bad, but it's like, but without that understanding of what it requires, then you end up having certain problems with regards to how things do end up working. And so, yeah, you need to get money, you need to explore town. I understand what the developers intended with that, but restricting the player's path or creating that kind of situation did not bode well for the game. So after getting some things done, we can actually talk with our friends here.
Damn, that was close. Innkeep! Vodka!
Tris Marigold! Lice eat me, but you are a treat to behold. Just a little pale.
Well, she did went through hell right there, and that's kind of the thing. These guys are old friends. They've been through quite a lot of adventures together. Triss, Zoltan, Dandelion.
Did you hear about Foltest?
Rumors travel faster than the wind.
Winds and rumors. I want to know the truth.
I want to know how Foltest died. And the dragon, was there really one there? And who rules Temeria now?
Say hello to Dandelion. In a nutshell, he always wants to know everything, really. There's a lot of discussions over here, but we can skip past all that. So basically she's saying that the world of Temeria is going to hell, and there's basically no one there in order to restore order. Except John Rondellis, who is the only one who has any kind of credibility in the country, but he doesn't have the kind of power behind him necessary in order to ensure that order is restored. This is an interesting bit of politicking right here, because there is no regent, there is no succession plan, there is no Temerian effectively around at this point. And the mages, well, let's just put it like this. The mages have kind of lost control of the situation themselves. And in fact, the mages themselves, with their constant politicking, have enabled the situation to unfold in the exact same way it has unfolded in Temeria. Like, the Lodge was the one responsible for things stabilizing in the north. They were the ones that were the advisors to kings. And the problem is, there is no lodge right now to really stabilize things. It's all, I mean, there is a lodge, clearly, but their plans, well, suffice to say, they haven't gone according to what they expected things to go down the path. And this is really the primal story of The Witcher 2 right here in a nutshell. It is that chaos, that interregnum, that uncertainty, and what that uncertainty breeds in the world when the people that have the power to act can't. And the people who should have known better don't have the understanding of how they screwed up in certain situations. What Triss is explaining right here, basically in this entire conversation with Zoltan and Dandelion, she's explaining how things are going to hell and back as a result of the chaos that exists. She's also explaining to Geralt and the player who doesn't exactly know. Like, obviously Witcher 2 was designed around the idea that new players would come in. It has its issues, it has its flaws, it has its problems, and so they were looking for a kind of explanation. The problem, if we want to talk about it, is in trying to explain things this way as opposed to a more gentle path, is that they went down too hard the path of saying things as opposed to people being able to explore them. Because these conversations, as interesting as they are for a vast number of players, and they certainly were very interesting for myself to listen to everything that was said, for people that aren't already invested in the universe, for new players, they weren't good enough to really create that kind of investment. You already need to care about the Witcher universe in order to give a damn about these conversations. In this respect, Witcher 2 handled Witcher 3 handled things better than Witcher 2. And then there's, of course, even more chaos, because that's the kind of script that they wrote. Like, the developers and story writers of CD Projekt had a pretty good idea of how things would unfold, the kind of chaos. It's just, well, they were developers working on a tight budget and trying to make things work in a period of time when their whole company was on the line. Honestly, as I stated before, it's a goddamn miracle that this game even came out to begin with. Frankly, I would dare say that the Siege of Lavalette Castle should have been the middle portion of the game, and the intro portion should have been something related to Flotsam, though not necessarily Flotsam. The tutorial that we ultimately ended up getting for the game is something that was much belated and something we needed from the very beginning of the game. There are sections of this game that would have served significantly better as an intro sequence than the entirety of than the entire section that we ended up getting in Lavalette Castle. Maybe we would have explored the events of Lavalette Castle through a memory if they really wanted to go down that path, as opposed to the interrogation that Roach puts us through. Because the problem with interrogations from a story standpoint is that they create a kind of uncertainty in the player base. It's kind of like walking into a hospital, for instance, and you're there to be treated, but the entire architectural structure, or in this case game design, is working against you and doctors, and thus developers and players in this particular context, from working the way they should. And that's how we get a mess of a situation. Great story, superb, but the execution of it all would have been, was not necessarily as ideal as it could have been. And so the developers, like Geralt in this particular sequence, have to use tricks in order to get things done. They have to ensure that things, like through some damn miracle, things ultimately ended up unfolding as well as they did. And then, of course, we get the contract over here for the Karen, the beast over here. And that ends up serving as one of the main limits over here. You're free to explore Flotsam as you want, but unless you deal with the Karen, which requires dealing with Sheila, you're going to be stuck over here wandering around down the endless corridors. It's like playing this game is like being locked in an insane asylum, which is kind of hilarious because there absolutely is one in this sequence of the game that you even visit. So that ends up being the hilarity of the game. Like, some people really know what kind of chaos they were spewing here. I wouldn't be surprised if someone over there in CDPR, even if they weren't the doctor themselves, some of the developers had family members that were doctors and understood how things don't work, or had experience, because we all have experience with the medical system, had experience of how the entire system in itself can work against itself. And maybe that's what the story they were trying to tell, but they ended up failing just the same way a lot of doctors do end up failing in real life. Though in this case, it was a game development issue. Trying to tell too much all at once, trying to give player the freedom to choose, but also putting hard limits on what the player can choose. This is where Witcher 3, for all its flaws, and I will stress out that Witcher 3's flaws are legion in comparison to Witcher 2 from a story standpoint, and the Witcher 2 story is significantly better than Witcher 3. Witcher 3 has a much better game structure. Where Witcher 3 fails is that it's too open. They were really trying to chase the myth of Skyrim. They were trying to chase that money pot that Skyrim provided, and they were probably not particularly happy about the fact that they worked their asses off, almost lost everything, and then the game of the year ended up being Skyrim, which, I wouldn't be surprised if that certainly directed certain things in CDPR at the end of the day, because in the same year that Dark Souls and Witcher 2 came out, Skyrim winning Best RPG of the Year is, like, honestly an insult to all that work, effort, energy that was put in both those games. And maybe that is something that dictated the direction that CDPR went down. Of course, the problem is they got rewarded a bit too well with Witcher 3, and that made them arrogant enough to believe their own myth. And in believing their own myth, we can use the example of Sheila, who thought she was in control of Lefo. In believing their own myth, they ended up in a situation where the only outcome, the only tangible outcome that could ultimately end up occurring from all of that was the disaster that we ultimately ended up getting with Cyberpunk. See, that's the problem with video game companies in a nutshell. They do something that lands well. They bust their balls trying to deliver a product. They release it. They don't get the recognition they feel it deserves. Then they correct, and then they think the correction is the be-all and end-all. Whereas in reality, they corrected the problem for a particular game, and then they ignored the pitfalls that game had. Because a lot of people, including CDPR, ignored like the visual downgrade issues, ignored the various problems that would come out of it. The gameplay issues, the open world nature, and the thing is, they went even further along with that with Cyberpunk 2077 as opposed to course correcting from the issues Witcher 3 had. I mean, Witcher 2 is a good game, but Witcher 3 is, I think, the lesser game. And I will stand on that hill and die on that hill regardless of what people tell me. Witcher 3 may have a better game structure available to it, and I'm not going to dispute that particular aspect. And look, here's Triss. Here's another scripted moment where you're being taken for a ride by Triss to go see exactly what the Karen is about, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've played the game, so I guess we'll find out where Triss is going to take us on this merry-go-round. Because it is a merry-go-round. It's a clown show. It's a circus. It's really a circus, and we're all involved. And it's not just us, the players or the characters in the game, it's also the developers themselves that ended up creating their own trap and falling into it with some of the decisions they made with this game and the decisions they ended up making in future games as well. They tried to course correct too much from Triss' romance with Yennefer in Witcher 3, and we all know how that ended. I mean, I think I always stand by the words of Doug Cuckle, who says, from his perspective, the best romance choice of Witcher 3, really, or the best romance choice, the one he personally prefers. And he's played Geralt, so maybe he knows a thing or two about Geralt in a lot of different ways. But he said that from his view, and it's just his personal view, that he thinks that Triss is the better romance choice as opposed to Yennefer. I mean, it's not besmirching Yennefer. He was very clear on that particular point. It's more so that from the perspective of what Geralt needs as a romance option, as a lover, and we can also look back at the books to also indicate that the romance, the love story between Yennefer and Geralt was not exactly the most ideal option. Though, then again, we can also point out something here. A person chooses who they chooses, and trying to control that is never going to be great. I think that's the moral that Sapkowski was trying to tell with that specific story. Obviously, Doug Cuckle, who is very connected to Geralt as a character, considering how many hundreds of hours he spent recording the guy, probably has his own opinion. But the moral that Sapkowski was writing with regards to Yennefer is not that it's a perfect romance. It's ultimately a story, and stories are moral lessons in their own right. I mean, Cockle just points out what's best for Geralt as a character. Sapkowski is trying to teach a very different lesson altogether on that level with regards to all of it. So we get to chase down the Kirin and try and find its lair, and we get to deal with some friends along the way with all of this, alongside Triss. The Witcher adventure, in a nutshell. Maybe that is really the moral lesson of Flotsam. Things happen when they happen, not when you think they should happen. Maybe that's something CDPR should have understood, because that can happen if you don't understand that. So finally, we get to meet the man of the hour, Loredo himself, who was also talking with Sheila about various things, and we eavesdropped on that because this was like a Tom Clancy mission, really, all things considered. Loredo is a compelling character from the perspective that he's obviously deeply corrupt, in a way that maybe people in the West don't quite understand, but those of us that live in Eastern Europe do understand very well. And that's kind of the purpose of his character, isn't it? To showcase how someone who's trying to do a job, it can also try and make some money on the side, really, with respect to all of that. He does give Geralt some information, and he does pose a moral question as well to Geralt. What is his stance on humans versus non-humans? Because he points out very clearly that you can't just straddle the fence on the aspect of humans versus non-humans. You must pick a side on that subject. Well, of course, you must pick a side, but that doesn't mean you have to be against non-humans. That's also the secondary moral dilemma that Loredo poses. And when he actually lives every single day as the commander in charge of Flotsam, Loredo is a question for the player, and it's the question of what side are you on? What stance will you hold? And how will you hold it? And that's perhaps the most important lesson, really, in Flotsam in of itself. Because you have to take a stance, have a position on the subject, make a decision that will resonate, and ultimately make that decision very clearly. The game is building up towards the decision that you will have to make at the end of Chapter 1. And that decision is ultimately between Yorvith and Roach, and it is the fundamental decision of the entire chapter. Now, I've made my choice many times. I've gone down both paths, but I think both paths are worth exploring, to be sure. And that is perhaps the greatest quality of The Witcher 2. And forget the lighting issues here. The game has some weird lighting issues on the subject, but really, there's a whole bunch of discussion to be had on the moral values that you should take, or the moral stance you should take. Loredo being in the middle of it is not really a stance. It's more like, look at what he's become as a result of his own personal stance. Ambiguity is no solution. One has to take a clear stance. And Roach clearly is not necessarily a great guy, but nor is Yorvith. The question is, who do you trust more? What kind of perspective do you have on the subject? Do you believe that a structured response to the issue is better? Do you believe that rebellion is better? And that's what ultimately the Scoia'tael versus the Special Forces ask of you as a question. And we can see what not taking a stance on that leads to. It's right in the middle of your face on the screen right now. And that's all I had to say for this one. Christine signing out. And I'll see you boys soon enough.